picked up his budget book and had to leave.
Oh, okay,
We don't know over here.
The staff,
I'm getting out of here.
the staff is falling out.
I woke up busy this morning.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and call our meeting to order this morning for our annual budget hearings, and I'll recognize Ms. Sarah Davis to call the roll.
Danny Ellis,
Here.
Nancy Barker, John Gibson,
Here.
Joshua Gillum,
Here.
Tom Kern, Robbie Palmer,
Here.
Jason Roach.
Here.
We have 6 members present constituting a quorum. And I will call the roll for the additional commissioners. Jeff Barrett,
Here.
Chad Britton, Larry Quant,
Here.
Linda Davis, Jimmy Riley,
Here.
Charlie Thacker, and Sybil.
All right, thank you. You have your budget committee hearing, three-ring binder in front of you. Of course, there is a schedule in the front. We need to shift some things around. There was a scheduling mishap with Judge Ross's court and recovery court. So I'm going to go ahead, if it's okay with the committee, we're going to recognize Judge Ross to come and share with us so he can get back to work.
That's on page 23, everyone.
Thank you.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning, Judge Ross.
Give us some answers, sorry.
Judge Ross, if you'd like to just kind of give us a flyover, and I heard you discussing earlier some of the increasing costs that you're going to have.
Yeah, well, I mean, the overall budget looks like it's about the same as, actually it's a little less than the one last year. But the only major change that we have is the way that our competency evaluations have been billed. Those are the ones where if someone's in court and the public defender or their attorney comes to the court and says we need to move for a competency evaluation to determine whether or not they were competent at the time they committed the offense, or whether or not they're able to assist in their own defense, then I basically have no choice but to send them for an evaluation. The way it was working in the years prior, when I first got here, we were being charged like $600 or $700 for those. And we contacted Frontier, and we ended up getting a reduced rate of $100 for the misdemeanor offenses. The felony offenses are paid for by the state. The misdemeanor offenses are responsibilities of the county. So something happened, I guess, between Frontier and the state over the last year, and what happens now is Frontier actually bills the state for all of those evaluations. And then if it's a felony offense and the state pays that, if it's a misdemeanor offense and the state pays us or sends us a bill for reimbursement for $800, so that expense has gone up. There is supposedly, there is legislation that's working its way through. Whether or not it'll pass or not is still to be seen. But there's efforts being made in Nashville to have the state pay for all of these, but just as a precaution, we put it in there, increased amount for those evaluations to take place, because our mental health population is not declining by any means. So those, probably have gone up over the past few years and will probably continue to go up. There's really nothing we can do to help that in the courtroom. So, other than that, I think there was a new line item for in-service and staff development of $500, but I think that was just moving some money from my travel to that because it was more appropriately budgeted under that line item or something.
From other supplies and materials, so the travel decrease was to help offset the increase. We really could for evaluation and testing, but yeah, it was just
That's not a new expense, it's just coming out of a different.
just more accurately representing what it is. Exactly.
Other than that, I think everything's pretty much the same.
Did you say those evaluations went from $100 to $800?
I think that's right, yes.
Yeah, Frontier was billing us $100, but now they're just
volunteers billing the state's reimbursing them, and then turning around and billing us, the way I understand it.
And,
So it's
I said it's
$800.
$800, it's actually $400 per evaluation. So if I send someone just for competency at the time of the offense, it's $400. We don't, typically those go hand in hand. So it's $400 for the competency at the time, and $400 for ability to assist in their own defense and understand what's going on with their case. So, the unfortunate part about that is it typically takes anywhere from minimum of 60 days to probably 90 to 120 days to get all that done and get the results back so we can move on with their case. And most of these people end up incarcerated during that time because a lot of the reasons is that they have nowhere to go. And we'll just release them. They can't make bond, most of them. So that's the other issue is they're being incarcerated and staying incarcerated because they're mentally ill, which I don't like, but I don't know what other choice we have. We don't have anywhere to send them a lot of times. So.
Any questions for Jeff Ross? All right, thank you, Jeff.
You want to do the recovery report real quick?
Yes, sir.
While we're here? I don't have that.
The very next page, page 24. Yeah, yeah.
And the recovery report budget's based, it's funded by the state through a grant. I don't think the county contributes anything to that, so basically we just try to determine the best way to use the funds that we're given. I think the only major change here was I was hoping that we would have enough with our increase in our grant to bring on like a part-time case management type person to help with like home visits and drug screens on the weekends and things like that. There's not a whole lot of money to do that, so I'm hoping I can find somebody willing to do it for what we've got, but,
That grant did increase from 100,000 to 100,000, 103,500. So that's what you'll see tied back there at the bottom of that budget total.
You said the part-time helper for home visits and.
just, I was gonna try to do like a case man, Kathy's on her own, so, I was hoping to have somebody that might be able to do, things arise in the evenings and nights and weekends, and we don't have any ability to drug screen people on the weekends, or just check on people and see how they're doing at home, check on their home status and their environments that they're living in, we basically have to take their words for it, and, so if we had somebody like that that could go around, periodically check on them in their own environments, that would be very, very beneficial for us. And most recovery courts have at least two staff, but we don't have budget for that, so it's probably about the best we can do.
Okay, any other questions for Judge Ross?
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good one.
All right, so we'll shift back into the agenda, and I'll recognize Eric to go over the budget. So what we have this morning, I had told the budget committee I did just a little presentation myself. But Eric's going to go first, and then I'll go. Mine will be very short, 10 or 15 minutes, I think. And then we will have a break, and the next hearing that we'll have is the trustees. So, Eric, whenever you're ready, sir.
All right. Y'all bear with me, I'm feeling a little under the weather today, and try to get through this all. As Jason said, you already have a schedule in there, kind of help us find everybody's budgets as they come in. Once you crack that notebook, the first page beyond the schedule is the assessment from the property assessor, how I establish the value of the penny. As you can see, our penny this year has increased, which is significantly better than last year. That caused us a lot of grief last year when our penny value decreased. So luckily, we're up this year. The value of penny collected at an accurate percent is gonna be $122,262.53. I wish it was higher, but at least it's not decreasing in value again. And you'll see on there some of my calculations. The next page is where I get the public utilities, the state assessed properties, to add into that penny valuation. The next page after that is your CTAS salary schedule for your minimum mandated salaries for your elected officials and fee officials. If you look up that column on your far left, you see the population class. We're in the 50,000 to 64,999 class. And then you'll see a few manual calculations on the page. The sheriff receives a salary supplement, which therefore pushes the mayor's salary. The mayor statutorily has to be 5% ahead of any other official, being the sheriff or highway superintendent. So that's what pushes his. And then in that top right, you'll see where we calculated the judge's COLA. The AOC gives you their COLA, and it was at 4.1%. So there's your judge's salaries, and you'll see those numbers tie back throughout the budgets as we look at them. If you'll flip that first divider over to the general fund notes. Tax rate assessment on which to base property tax collections. This budget is based on the current information received from the property assessor's office, with the total assessment being $1,314,650,871. The assessment has been reduced $300,000 to allow for any further appeals or other changes. Penny at 100% is $131,465.09, but of course we use the 93% collection rate to be conservative, and that's the $122,262.53 I mentioned on that earlier page. Last year's budget assessment was $1,289,724,161. This year's assessment is $24,926,700 higher than last year's. 2024 assessment summary from the property assessor's office is included in your book. That's the page we just talked about. Just a brief update on a few of the revenues. Your current property tax. The estimate for current property tax is based on the current property tax rate of 2.3247, of which 93.03 cents is allocated for this fund. Ratio is at 0.6921 as we are now in the year 2 of the current ratio. Just a reminder, this is the largest ratio Hawkins County has ever had. Through the month of February, we've collected 95.73 of the budget property tax collections for 23-24. Once we have March through June, we anticipate surpassing our budgeted amount. It's a pretty good collection rate, but that is typically how it works. Largest amount comes in February when they're due, so it's pretty typical to have that much around that time. The rate of budget current property tax collected for 22-23 at the end of February was 96.26, so we're about right on track with that. Prior year tax collections and interest and penalties for accounts 40120 through 40140. Revenue collected in these accounts will be approximately $20,000 less than what was budgeted. Next year has been decreased to reflect the shortfall. Next page, pickup taxes, account 40150. The estimated revenue for 23-24 fiscal year is slightly above budget. In prior years, the pickup taxes for Balboa and San Don. Next year's projections have been increased slightly to match. Wheel tax, account number 40240. The estimated revenue for 23-24 fiscal year is on par with projections. Estimated collections have been listed separately on the budget document so the commissioners can see what the original wheel tax amount is collecting, as well as the additional 30-10 split collection. This is what allowed the general fund to be balanced in the fiscal year 17-18 per word from the state comptroller's office. The $10 fee is also eligible to fund other public safety expenditures, including volunteer fire departments, rescue squads, Hawkins County Emergency Response Team, ambulance service, American Red Cross, and Hawkins County Humane Society. However, the expenditures have outpaced the revenue, so there is no longer any reserve for any special fund projects. Other taxes, fines, and fees, pages 1, 2, and 3. These revenues have been based on the actual amounts posted through February 24, plus estimates for the remainder of the year. These accounts appear to have stabilized after being reduced in the 21-22 fiscal year. No further reduction is needed this year. Litigation tax. It appears that we will collect very close to the amount of $80,000 that was budgeted in the 23-24 fiscal year. Thus, we're budgeting the same estimate of revenue for 24-25. Contracted prisoner board, account number 46915. Hawkins County receives this revenue for housing state inmates. Total collections through the December board bill payments are at 97.26%. This revenue is rebounding from a pandemic reduction and is being increased by $175,000 again for the second consecutive year. This is still a greatly reduced revenue from years past, but it will need to be increased to reflect current collections. The decline of the board bill is a direct result of the pandemic and the effect it had on the court system and the state prison system. The state had a surplus of beds, and in years past there was always a shortage. This revenue has rebounded, but is still decreased from previous projections. For reference, in 17-18, the board bill run roughly $1.6 million. Many of the revenue accounts postings run a month behind, so for the first draft, actual revenue figures are being estimated for at least 4 months, if not 5 or 6. By the end of the fiscal year, when actual revenues are posted, total revenue will change, hopefully with a positive result instead of negative. So that's why we estimate conservatively. Looking over some of the expenditures, salaries, the elected officials have received raises for the 24-25 fiscal year according to the county official salary schedule publication from CTAS. A copy of that is included in budget information beginning of your notebook behind the assessment information. Step raises are included for all general fund employees, but no COLA has been calculated yet, although several, if not all officials have inquired about one. I do not have a COLA sheet already prepared, but I'd be happy to prepare one at various intervals if you guys want me to look at that. Medical insurance estimates for the 24-25 fiscal year include a 12% rate increase. We have left the employee-employer split the same for the first draft at 30-70%, 30 for the employee, 70 for the employer. It will likely be August before we know what the increase will be. Since the plan year is November 1 through October 31st, we have calculated a 12% increase for 8 months. The total cost of medical insurance has increased since changing this plan due to more employees picking up the insurance as well as adding their dependents. The sheriff's department and jail budgets are usually estimated to include extra policies to be available should there be a need for a new or current employee to participate in our medical insurance plan. Additional policy premiums have also been included in account 58600-207, from which retirees' medical insurance premiums are paid. Funds should be available if an employee must pick up insurance in the middle of the year, resulting in the need to transfer appropriations from 58600 account to the appropriate office or department. The county allows a retiree hired prior to November 1st, 2017 to continue with the medical insurance plan until he or she reaches age 65 or becomes Medicare eligible. The county continues to pay its portion of a retiree's premium until that time. If the retiree has a dependent and wishes to continue coverage on the dependent until he or she reaches age 65, the county pays no portion of that premium. Additional changes may be made in medical insurance estimates before the final budget draft if there are personnel changes or coverage changes before June 30th. Employer contribution rate for retirement. Actuarial studies are not performed every year to determine the employer amount. We have received a rate calculation that will be in effect for July 1, 2024. The current employer contribution rate is 6.02%, with Hawkins County electing to pay 7% for Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System through June 30th, 2025. This will help offset any future rate increases. Hawkins County is a contributory participant in Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. This means that employees contribute 5% of their salary, with the county paying the employer's share. Some counties and entities are non-contributory, meaning that the agency pays the employees 5% as well as the employer's share. TCR's benefits are not based on the amount paid in for each employee, but rather on the highest 5 consecutive years of salary and the number of years of service. It is a pension, not a 401k. Contributions to area agencies. Contributions have been included for budget calculations in the 24-25 fiscal year at the same level as was budgeted for the 23-24 for all agencies. Listing and documentation for area agencies will be included in your contribution request notebooks. Several of those contributions have asked for increases, some of them fairly substantial increases. But for budgeting purposes, if you look at this document, you're going to see them in at last year's rates. They'll not be increased until you guys tell me to do so, if you do so. Contracts with government and public agencies. Most contracts with government and public agencies, such as First Tennessee Human Resource Agency, Upper East Tennessee Human Development Agency, etc., have been budgeted at the same level as 23-24 fiscal year. The budgeted amount for the Johnson City Forensic Center has been included Hawkins County share of $136,886, but that is just an estimate. Children's Comprehensive Services Juvenile Detention Center budget amount has been kept at $175,000. Other budget increases. The increases for computer maintenance, contracts, and other necessary expenditures to operate efficiently have been included in this first draft. Some requests above the previous year's budget have not been included and will not be until approved. See the additional request worksheet included in the budget information. I did not have time to get together an additional request worksheet. I have a little note here of every office that does have a new request. I'll make sure I mention them as they present. And then before we reconvene for second draft for motions for calculation purposes, I'll have dollar figures for those decisions. Reminder, there's a maintenance effort requirement for the Sheriff's Department, Property Assessor, Election Commission, and Library. The amount budgeted for workers' compensation insurance as well as property and casualty insurance may change once we finalize our insurance quotes. We have the Drug-Free Workplace Program in effect to receive a 5% credit on your premiums cost. We also receive a safety designee credit of 1%. General solid waste and highway funds pay their appropriate share of workers' compensation premiums, with any applicable credits being applied. Even though rates may remain basically the same from year to year, the premiums will increase due to increases in wages. June 30th, 2025 unassigned fund balance. This first draft of the general fund budget shows an estimated unassigned fund balance of $10,760,696 at the end of the 24-25 fiscal year. After June 30th, 24, this figure will change because the first draft usually will have expenditures slightly overestimated and revenues underestimated. Actual expenditures in the Sheriff's Department jail and actual revenues for the state board bills will be a major determining factor of the change in fund balance. The last several years, we've had to do a tax anticipation note for general fund to operate until prior taxes were collected. This should be true again this year. CTAS recommends that the general fund unassigned fund balance should be at least a minimum of 20% of total budgeted expenditures. The estimated unassigned fund balance for 24-25 is at 46.7 of the total estimated expenditures and other uses. It is necessary to maintain a good fund balance to continue to obtain the bond rating that we have now. A rating of AA3 was assigned on the March 21 bond issue. The financial health of Hawkins County will continue to be monitored by those in the bond and investment market. Also, a good fund balance is needed when you have to make grant expenditures before being filed for reimbursement. And that statement is also extremely true on our highway fund, which we'll talk about in more detail later, but I just wanted to remind everybody about the statement. You can't go out and do grants that are reimbursement style if you do not have a fund balance. Future budget changes. In future budget drafts, some expenditures funded by grants or insurance recovery funds may be switched from 23-24 to 24-25 if the project is not completed or underway before June 30, 24. This will not change the estimated fund balance for June 30, 2025. It will just change which year it's shown in. Any questions on the general fund?
Eric, on that projected unassigned fund balance from General Fund 101, you've got 48, page 48. In 2023-2024, it was projected at $10,059,477, and right now we're estimating it at $13,136,000. Can you talk about why we're coming back higher than we were projected to come back?
Yeah. It's our typical budget plan process. We are conservative on our revenues, and then of course, office holders, despite popular opinion, they do live within their budgets. They do only spend what they're appropriated, and quite often they turn some of their funds back in. So as the year cleans up and you see more actuals come in here, that picture should even increase farther. But we passed the budget with, I believe it was about 2.4 in the red, and right now we're projecting 124,000. So for this early in the first draft, it's very impressive.
Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome. Any other questions on the general fund? If not, please flip the page over to solid waste. The 2010-2011 fiscal year budget, county mandates change that required solid waste funds to be funded by designated revenues instead of the transfer from general fund that had in the past made up a major portion of revenue from solid waste sanitation operations. The revenue line items that were moved from general fund to solid waste are local option sales tax, business tax, cable TV franchise fees, and alcohol beverage tax. These particular revenues were chosen simply because the total of their anticipated revenues together with the usual revenue of waste hire disposal, sale of recycled materials, and solid waste grants gave us the total needed to fund anticipated expenditures. That statement is still true. If you remember last year, we discussed how well local option sales tax was performing, and we were going to incorporate a cap on that revenue. With anything that exceeded that cap, being sent over to general capital projects to help fund that and the pennies that were taken away from that fund. As we look over these budgets in more detail later, you'll see that that program seems to be successful, and that we did in fact have revenue projected to surpass that cap, and it will help fund our general capital projects fund. So, obviously success. Revenue, sales tax collections. We are estimating total collections to be $320,000 more than budgeted. However, solid waste will only recognize $150,000 of that overage. This is due to the $1.8 million cap on solid waste and local option sales tax. The remaining $170,000 estimated will be in Fund 171, General Capital Projects. For the 23-24 fiscal year, we will increase the budget amount by $100,000 over the 23-24 fiscal year budget amount in a conservative effort to get more in line with the actual revenue. Business tax. Total collections for business tax appear to be $25,000 more than what was budgeted. We are budgeting 24-25 at the same $350,000 as 23-24. Cable TV franchise license. Even though collections are estimated to match the budgeted figure, collections do appear to be declining compared to previous years. Therefore, we are lowering the budgeted estimated amount for 24-25 to $135,000. Sale of recycled materials. Total collections have been estimated at roughly $8,000 less than the budgeted amount. Thus, we are lowering this revenue to reflect the shortfall. Solid waste grants, $27,500 was budgeted in 23-24 fiscal year for a state waste tire grant based on current collections. We will raise this to $32,000 for 24-25, even though actual revenues may fluctuate from year to year. Alcohol beverage tax, total collections should be about $7,000 greater than the budgeted amount. Next year's estimates will increase slightly to $170,000. Sale of equipment, there was no sale of equipment during the 23-24 fiscal year. The timing of purchasing the new trash trucks for the sale of the old trucks is becoming exponentially harder. The intent is to sell 2 in the fall, assuming we're able to purchase 2 before then. The surplus trash trucks will be sold, with the proceeds being used to buy the new trash trucks. Since there was no sale this fiscal year, the reserve from the prior year's sale of surplus trash trucks was used completely. In the future, if the future proceeds surpass the purchase, a reserve will be reestablished. So some of you may already be familiar with that, if you discussed that at all in the solid waste committee or not, but getting those trucks, they're only making them special order. You have to commit to them way in advance. The time when they deliver them is kind of up in the air, and you can't sell until you have a truck to replace. So the timing of that program, it's still a great program, it's still working, our intent is still to follow it, but the timing is becoming a little more complicated than it used to be. Expenditures. Some of the salaries in the past were a mixture of full-time and part-time employees. For 19-20 fiscal year forward, we have separated those into 2 different line items for the benefit of the solid waste director as well as the accounting department. There's a 12% estimated increase included for health insurance from November, June 24th through June 25. It will likely be August when we know the actual rate increase. The estimated amount for workers' compensation insurance may change when we receive our final insurance quotes. However, it appears that they are sufficiently budgeted for workers' compensation in all categories, so the appropriate amount should not change. All budgets in solid waste saw a reduction in state retirement due to the new TCRS rate of 7% in the 19-20 fiscal year, down from 8.68. In 18-19, the same rate of 7% has been applied 2019-20 through 24-25. Sanitation management, we have increased trustees commission 2,000 due to revenue increases. Waste pickup, there's a part-time personnel line item in the budget. However, we've not been able to keep a part-time driver employed. In the 23-24 budget, we increased the overtime line item and decreased part-time and continued this through 23-24 budgets. That we can keep a part-time driver employed. We can do a budget amendment to move back funds, part-time from overtime.
Let me clarify something there. It's not 2013, 2014, it's 2023, 2024, correct?
The original change was made in 23-14.
Okay.
And we've kept it that way through that budget and continue to keep it that way through 24-25.
Okay, thank you.
Also, Eric, on that alcohol beverage tax, I might have misunderstood you. You said 170, and it reflects here 130.
Alcohol beverage tax. Total collection should be $7,000 greater. Next year, estimate will increase to $130,000. So
Okay.
we saw revenues coming in strong and increased that here. You'll see that reflected on page 2 of your actual budget. The original budget for 23-24 was at $128,000. Due to the way we see coming in, we're projecting $135,000, so we raised it up to $130,000. Okay. So we were on convenience centers. This budget was affected by the new $12 minimum hour wage rule for full-time employees and the $10 per hour minimum wage rule for part-time employees in the 21-22 fiscal year. Other waste collections no longer in use for a budget amendment during the 18-19 fiscal year. All the appropriations for this budget are now recycling center. Recycling center. As of the 19-20 fiscal year budget, recycling center salaries are now broken into full-time and part-time employees. This budget was also affected by the $12 minimum wage rule for full-time employees and $10 an hour minimum wage for part-time. The other waste disposal function is now included in the recycling center. Landfill operation and maintenance. The contract with BFI has been budgeted with a 10% increase over the 23-24 fiscal year budgeted amount, but this is only an estimate. I do not have that new contract in hand yet, so that will change when that comes in. Other waste disposal. This was a single line budget that has now been moved to be included with the recycling center budget. It was for waste tire disposal, and it is funded partially by activity fees and state grant. The way that the audit reviews your accounts, they look at them 2 ways. You can't have a function go over the 5-digit code, and as far as line items, you can't have any salaries go over. But if you have a other expenditure line, not salary related, it can go over slightly as long as it doesn't push the function over. But that other waste tire disposal, bills come in a month or 2 after the fact. It's already done, and it was a single line item budget. So if it went over, the whole function went over. So we have to put that in recycling center to avoid any problems with that in the future. Interest on notes. This line item is budgeted in case there is a need to do a tax anticipation note to be able to operate until revenues are received. We have not had to do this for the last several years and do not anticipate having to do it this year either. Bottom line for solid waste, it appears that the revenues budgeted will support expenditures for this fund with no new revenue needed. The estimated ending unassigned fund balance for the 24-25 fiscal year is $4,108,719. This is one of our healthier funds. Any questions on solid waste?
Eric, do you think this solid waste fund should be capped in when you move money around?
More than we already did, I'd be hesitant. If you look at page 7, we'll have our fund balances there across the bottom. 22, 23, we did put in a healthy amount, $796,000, almost $800,000 increase to fund balance. The original budget this year was projected at 86 in the red, it's showing 94 in the red. I'm sure as things clear up, that will not be the case. We are still projecting a negative fund balance, expenditures over revenues, not a negative fund balance, of $70,195. It's something we could explore. I don't know that I'd cap it much lower than what we did, but it is something we could discuss. I probably wouldn't cap any other revenues. I would probably consider just lowering that cap on local option sales tax. Probably what we would have a conversation about if you wanted to. Any other questions on solid waste? All right. The next tab is drug fund. I'm going to let the sheriff explain that one to you. After that is ARPA. I don't have any notes on ARPA, but I'd be happy to discuss anything if you want to discuss anything on the ARPA budgets. I just will caution you, when you look at the ARPA budget on page 3, ignore the fund balance. I know that sounds kind of strange to say, but we received that cash years ago in 2 tranches, the verbiage they used. But because of the way this money was given to us, audit had us require this a little different. It's on the books as a liability. The money is owed back to the federal government until the day that we spend it. So I can't recognize revenue until we actually spend it. So that's why it looks this way. But this isn't wrong. This is how audit has told us we have to do it. But if there's any questions on the revenue or any questions on the expenditures in that budget, I'd be happy to address them with you.
You have a current list of what monies had been distributed out from ARPA?
I can get that for you now. I mean, essentially, it's kind of what's there in your budget, but that's not necessarily dollars spent. Some of that's also encumbrances. We've got that money obligated down to only have a few $100,000 left, but as far as spent out, there's still a lot of money to be spent. Of course, the largest chunk of that being our big construction projects. Those take time to get the engineer studies, time to bid out, time for them to break ground. So there's a lot of money still tied up in the Justice Center roof project and the HVAC project. Any other ARPA questions?
When does it all have to be spent?
Has to be obligated December 31 of 24, has to be expended by December 31st of 26.
So we likely need to start talking in the real budget committee meetings about whatever money's left, where it's gonna go, because it has to be obligated by December 31st.
Yeah, it's approaching pretty quickly.
Yeah, it'll get here before we know it.
Of course, I think the last time the committee discussed it, I think you were looking pretty heavily at fire department radios. And if that's still the pleasure of the committee, if I'm not mistaken, that was also.
That'll like it,
Yeah, so shouldn't have too much of an issue there. Now, Mr. Miller will probably give you an update at some point. I'm not sure if he presents today or tomorrow, but he has concluded the turnout gear project. And we discussed the possibility of there being some money left over. There was. And so that money left over could be redistributed for radios or any other expenditure the committee sees fit. There's a few other projects that may have come in slightly less than what they were budgeted for, but nothing of significance. The turnout gear was only significant under budgeted project.
So do the projects have to be completed by 26?
It's my understanding, yeah, obligated by 24, expended by 26. So yeah, we need to have whatever we're gonna do done by then. Our longest project, I would assume, would be the roof and HVAC, and although it's slow, I don't foresee it being that problematic. A lot of the other projects where we're doing contributions, I mean, when we cut the check, it's expended. Now the radios, we probably would purchase through this office and then disperse the radios, but I know there's some lead time on that large of a purchase, but I don't think it would be anything close to that, I don't believe. Anything else on ARPA? All right, moving along, next tab is highway fund. I'll give you a brief overview of the revenues, and then I'll defer to the road superintendent, he presents to talk about his expenditures. Estimate of the current property tax is based on the current property tax rate of 2.3247, of which 12.57 cents is allocated for this fund. We already went over the assessment on how we got to there. Current property taxes are estimated to finish roughly 44,000 above the budget amount 2324. Estimated property tax revenue is budgeted $29,140 higher than it was last year. So he did have a little bit of property tax growth. I haven't ran the 5-year average on him, but I don't think we stuck with the problem we were last year where we had to watch a violation of the maintenance there from the highway revenue. Gasoline, the net total of estimated local taxes collected for 2324 appears to be more than what was budgeted by $10,000. Overall revenues are fairly consistent with the amounts budgeted. Gasoline tax appears to be consistent with what was budgeted for 2324. This was one of the revenues that was advised to keep our estimates conservative during the pandemic, but now the estimate is back in line with the actual revenues being received. The highway department has ARPA funds for the various pieces of highway equipment. These monies will not be reflected in Highway Fund 131, and all of those are in ARPA money in Fund 128. Highway superintendent will explain expenditures and any questions associated with them. I do just want to touch on the overall health of this fund. It's not good. If you go to page 6, you'll see in 22-23, sometimes we project in the red, but then when the year cleans up, we don't actually dip into our fund balance. That is not true in this fund. In this fund, we did. So it's $221,766. So we have a decline in fund balance. The budget was projected last year with 1.7, basically 1.8 in the red. And as of now, we're projecting it to be about 1.6 in the red. I do think some of that will come in less, but I don't know that we'll see some of the swing we've seen in years past or in other budgets. So this is not sustainable. As you'll see there, if you look over one more line farther, the estimated expenditures for this year, 24-25, is at 8.8, which gives us a shortfall of 2.7, basically $2.8 million. If you look at that bottom figure, that is not allowable. That is a negative $288,000 fund balance. That can't happen. So this budget cannot be sent to the comptroller's office. It is not a valid budget. This would greatly prohibit him having the ability to work on any roads or bridges, because a lot of that is reimbursement style. And if you can't front the money in cash while you're waiting for that reimbursement to come in, it creates a lot of problems. Sometimes you can bill, structure with people as such that they do the work, they give you the bill, you send the bill to the state, they reimburse you, then you pay the vendor. But it creates issues, not only on the grant side, but also just on payroll. A lot of your collections is through property tax, not all of these are. Some of it's through gas tax, which is pretty standard month to month. But you're looking at property tax, doesn't come in until December and February. Payrolls all year long. So I don't know how you guys want to address that, but it's going to have to be addressed again. So whether it's a reduction in the expenditures in his projected budget, you'll see there is $1 million, $1,006,967 in increased request for funding. So that's between you and the road superintendent. What kind of road department you want to have, what his vision is, what your vision is. But if your vision is his vision, it needs funding. So funding has to increase, or expenditures have to decrease. Not sustainable, cannot pass, will not send it to the comptroller's office this way. Next tab, general debt service.
Hey, Eric.
Yes, sir.
Remind me which, I heard you say earlier that not all the increases that if an office holder requested an increase in funding, is that reflected in
So
his budget?
that statement was true for the general fund.
Okay.
We've not done it for the highway.
Gotcha.
But I made sure to include that fifth column. So if there's ever any question on how that aligns from a previous year, that fifth column will show you whether it's the same as it was in previous years, an increase or a decrease.
Absolutely, yeah, that's very helpful. I heard you say about the general fund,
Yeah.
I thought I heard that, and then I saw where he had a significant increase that you mentioned, and I wanna make sure I hadn't misheard that. So if there are increases in funding requested for general fund, but they are not reflected in the budget we have in front of us, is that correct?
I had you right up to the end. Let me say it one more time.
Confusing statement.
Let me say it one more time and see if I answer you, okay? In the general fund, you will see increases.
Yeah.
The majority of those increases are what we call uncontrollables for the most part. Postal charges going up, insurance going up, paper, office supplies going up. I don't pull those out. I generally try to only pull out something new. The employee that I requested is not in the budget until you tell me I can put it in there. Mr. Brent Price is going to ask you for some software money so he can do some different things. He'll explain that in much more detail when he comes in here. That's not in there currently. But if all you have is an operating increase, it is in there. But you'll still have that fifth column. You'll be able to see that. Also, like when Judge Ross was presenting earlier today, I pushed that reclassification of that line. It wasn't really an increase. He gave a line shorter where we used to pay it from, increased that line. You'll see a swap of 5 to 5. So nothing's trying to be hid or slipped in there. That fifth column is your red flag if something's went up or down. But I try to pull out new requests on the highway. It's historically never been done that way. Also, there's so much variation from year to year. The new request sheet would be about the whole budget. So it's just simpler to look at it line by line, ask any questions you have when he presents. But yes, there's definitely funding increases already in the highway budget.
Yeah.
Did that answer?
It absolutely did,
Okay.
yes. Thank you.
Okay, you're very welcome. Anything for revenue on highway? I don't want to answer any expenditure questions, I'll defer those to him, but I'll answer the revenue questions on highway if you have any. All right, hearing none, the next tab is general debt service fund. And I'll try to be brief, I think we're doing okay on time, Jason? Yeah. Okay. General debt service fund, revenue. Current property tax, the estimate for current property tax for 24-25 is based on the current property tax rate of 2.3247, of which 6.28 cents is allocated to this fund, and of course, we use that same 93% collection rate for all of our funds. Tax rate history, 18-19 fiscal year tax rate for this fund was decreased to 1 cent, with the remaining usual 7 cents being allocated to the general capital projects fund. This allows the proposed capital projects to be funded at the same amount as the refund of the general debt service fund for repayment of the spec building in the Phippsman Industrial Park. Hawkins County was refunded by the Industrial Commission the principal and interest that had been paid to build the spec building in the amount of $721,248. It's just a little history lesson. The tax rate for 1920 was budgeted at 5 cents, which included returning 4 cents from the general capital projects tax rate. The remaining usual 3 cents were left as a portion of the tax rate in general capital projects fund to fund the jail sewer grinder project and future projects. The tax rate for 2021 was budgeted at the same 5 cent, with the tax rate for 2022 changing to 4.28 after reappraisal. That change from 5 to 4.28, that gets confused a lot of times, like those pennies were taken, those pennies were not taken. That was due to reappraisal. So less pennies equal the same yield. Property tax rate for 22-23, 23-24, and 24-25 in this fund includes returning another 2 cents from general capital projects fund. This is absolutely necessary in order to be sufficient revenue to meet future debt payments. Unfortunately, this is one of these funds that there's really not much you can do with it, unless it's building a fund balance. But we have to have sufficient tax rate in there to satisfy our debts. It's not acceptable to default on debt payments. Some places do it, but it's not acceptable. Litigation taxes for jail courthouse. Litigation taxes and general debt service funds are to be used to retire debt for the Justice Center and the courthouse renovation project. This year's estimated collections are projected at $78,424. This revenue fluctuates from the original annual anticipated collections of $117,000 when this tax was established. Investment income. This is the account into which interest earnings on the county's trustees' investments are recorded. Interest earnings are shared at this time with school cafeteria, general debt, and education debt service funds. Projected interest earnings have increased this fiscal year by some $37,000 over the previous fiscal year. However, due to fluctuation in investment rates, such increases may not be sustained over the entire 24-25 fiscal year. That's one that I budget extremely conservative because we have no control over that and they can fluctuate so much. But during this current inflation, which has crippled people, it's been a terrible time, but the one positive has been our investment income has far surpassed what we budgeted. What you do with it, because everything's so expensive, but at least it is yielding some good returns for us in that. Interest division. The division of interest earnings that is being deposited in general debt service fund and education debt service fund has been determined by the amount of fund balance in each of these funds on a June 30th basis. The division for 23-24 was at 13.18 of total interest for general debt service and 86.82 for education debt service. If no motion is made to be otherwise, the division of interest posted to these funds will be determined in the same manner as 23-24. Projected interest division for 24-25 is 11% for general debt service and 89% for education debt service. Expenditures. The expenditures in this fund are retired debt for purchase of property for and construction of the Justice Center, jail, and renovations of the courthouse. There are now 3 separate bond issues for this debt. Other expenditures include paying agent fees, other debt service charges, and trustees' commission. Paying agent fees and other debt issuance charges are fees paid to banks or financial consultants for administrative services relating to our bonds, capital outlay notes, and or loans. And then down there you'll see a history of the general debt service fund. Fiscal year, the way the tax rates has changed. And if you flip over, you'll see the current debt for Justice Center and course renovation as of June 30, 2024. Bottom right there, you'll see that total outstanding principal, total interest. We are slated to have the 2016 and 19 bonds paid off on June of 25, and then the 2021 bond will be paid off in March of 36. Any questions on general debt service? These funds have a declining fund balance, but between our evaluation and the consultant, Cumberland Securities, the fund balance is declining at a rate that is sufficient to satisfy the debt. So that is normal. It is okay for them to be declining as long as they're not declining faster than satisfying with the debt. We look at that as well as feedback to someone that make sure that we're not missing anything. Next tab is your highway debt service. Special Debt Service Fund, highway. The purpose of this fund is retired debt associated with highway, roads, and bridge improvement or construction and or large equipment purchases. Revenue. The Special Debt Service Fund is funded by 1/3 of certain wheel tax collections. That certain wheel tax is 1/3 of the original 20. You remember not too long ago, Mr. Alice asked me to make a presentation to the full commission about how that wheel tax is broken down and who actually gets what. I know there's always a misconception, and I don't know why I talk about it numerous times, but the highway is getting the $96. The highway does not get the $96. The highway gets 1/3 of the original 20 for their debt service. None of that goes into their operating fund. So, try to share it every time I get a chance to cut down on misinformation, but it still runs rampant for some reason. Where will I at? Special Debt Service Funds. At one time, the 1989 gasoline taxes that are received from the state were transferred to the Special Debt Service Fund from the Highway Fund. However, that ceased in the 11-12 fiscal year when the Highway Department needed that revenue to help with their operating expenditures. The wheel tax collection still appears to be sufficient for retiring the current debt. Expenditures. Highway Special Debt Service Fund budget includes payments for principal and interest on one refunded bond issue for highway and road improvements and or bridge construction and the purchase of equipment. Outstanding debt on June 30th, 2024 basis as as follows. And you'll see there the 2019 debt issue, the outstanding principal and interest. Other expenditures, just like the other fund, include the paying agent fees, debt service charges, and trustees commission. This issue will be paid off June of 25 with no other debt remaining. So I talked about that with you guys last year. I'm not sure if anybody remembers that conversation, but we talked about it's a little complicated to change how that money works because it's part of the wheel tax. Anytime you alter the wheel tax, you need 2 consecutive votes with a 2/3 majority, if I'm not mistaken. So you cannot continue to feed a debt service fund if there's no debt to pay off. So my recommendation at the time was to establish a highway capital projects fund, and so that we could buy things in cash as the need came up. Of course, that may change depending on how things play out with our various bridge issues. We very well may have debt in highway debt service for several years or decades to come. So my recommendation still stands if we don't issue new debt, but if we issue new debt, I will retract my recommendation. We will need to keep the wheel tax money in the debt service fund, as well as probably add several pennies. So just wanted to update you. That is a very fluid situation. I don't think there's any updates to speak on at this point, but it's up in the air. So I would not waste a lot of time discussing what we're going to do with this wheel tax money and highway debt service, because most likely it's not going anywhere. Any questions on highway debt service? All right, next tab is education debt service. The purpose of this fund is to record retirement of debt that has been issued for schools. Most of the debt is retired from the property tax collections and wheel tax collections allocated to this fund. However, certain debt that is retired from the general purpose school fund is also recorded in the education debt service fund. These payments can be viewed as a pass-through posting, since the revenue received from the Board of Education equals the amount paid out. And that is the case for our Q-scabs and our ESIs. Revenue is current property tax, tax rate 2.3247, of which 24.82 cents is allocated to this fund, and we use that same 90% collection rate. Investment income, this is the revenue account for which interest earnings on the county trustees' investments are recorded. Investment earnings are shared with the school cafeteria, general debt service, education debt service. Interest earnings for this fund have increased an estimated $422,379 over last year's actuals. However, due to fluctuating investment rates, such increases may not be sustained for the entire fiscal year. Also, investment earnings from the state for the qualified school construction bond allocated to Hawkins County are also posted to this account. This interest earnings are noted on the payment invoices we received from the Tennessee State School Bond Authority. 48,130 contributions. This account is used to record revenue received from general purpose school fund to reimburse education debt service fund for scheduled principal, interest, and administration fee payments on the 2009 and 2010 Q-scab bond issues and the ESI loans. Even though the Board of Education funds retirement of this debt, accounting practice requires that these payments be recorded in the education debt service. So that's what I was referencing earlier with the pass-through money. 49800 transfer in. This account is used to record the transfer from general fund for the interest due on the 2010 qualified school construction bond issue. IRS guidelines require that the IRS subsidy that is received semi-annually for this issue be run through general fund instead of debt service. So it comes into general fund monthly. I expense it over to debt service, we match the invoice, and then the 12th month, when it runs short, I bill the BOE and they pay the difference. So it's just hoops we have to dance through to satisfy requirements. Interest division, that's the exact same paragraph I read to you in the general debt service. Nothing is said otherwise. We'll continue the same division. Like I said, it'll be 11% for general debt service and 89% for education debt service. Expenditures in this fund are for retiring debt issues for phase 1, 2, and 3 school construction projects and other school improvements funded by the 09 and 10 qualified school construction bonds through the Tennessee State School Bond Authority and by the ESI loan program. Outstanding debt on a June 30th, 24 basis as is follows. And you'll see that there below. On the outstanding principal, the outstanding interest. If you'll flip the page, you'll see the debt retired from general purpose school fund, where we have the Q-scabs and the ESIs listed. The ESIs 1 and 2 are now retired, working on retiring 3, 4, and 5. Down below that, you'll see your tax rate history for this fund. This one gets talked about a lot as well, about how cents were taken. Quite often, if you'll notice, the change in the cents coincides with the reappraisal year. So, quite often, there wasn't pennies taken. Less pennies were needed to yield the same result. This is one of our better funds. I'll go over that here just a minute. Let me finish these notes. 2010 qualified school construction bond issue. County Commission passed resolutions in June and August of 2010 for Hawkins County to be part of the 2010 qualified school construction bond, or QSCAP, through the Tennessee State School Bond Authority. At the time, these resolutions were discussed with the Budget Committee and County Commission. The project was that these bonds would be low-interest bonds and that the Board of Education would fund retirement of this debt, including principal interest and or administration fees, and that practice continues to this day. The bonds were actually issued in such a way that the IRS would pay a subsidy to the entities who were participating, the total amount being the entire interest requirement for the issue until such time as the debt was completely retired. However, in 2013, the subsidy was subjected to a sequestration rate by the federal government, which reduced the amount Hawkins County is receiving. Therefore, the Board of Education is being invoiced the difference between the amount of subsidy received and the amount of interest that is paid each fiscal year. This subsidy is not restricted to debt service, but as the Board of Education is funding the return of this debt, it is assumed that the subsidy will be used for the interest payments. The Office of State and Local Finance informed participating entities on June 6, 2011, the deposit of this subsidy must be deposited into the general fund in order to comply with IRS tax regulations. Therefore, in order for us to meet this compliance, this subsidy has been and will continue to be deposited into general fund with the equivalent amount being transferred to education debt service each time interest is due on the 2010 QSCAP issue. The general fund and education debt service fund budgets will continue to reflect this appropriate line to allow this process. Also, there will continue to be applicable language regarding this issue in the appropriations resolution of the budget document. These procedures have been discussed with the State and Local Finance Office as well as local government audit. Debt management policy, an updated debt management policy will be presented to County Commission on April 22nd, 2024. One of the requirements of the county governor's 3-star program is the debt management policy be reviewed annually by the county mayor and the county commission. I think you guys saw that in your packet. I think we discussed that briefly Monday. So if you flip to page 2, you'll notice that this fund actually has an increasing fund balance, which is very abnormal for a debt service fund, but it has sufficient tax rate in it. However, I would greatly caution against over-celebrating that and using any of it. That adage we always use, robbing Peter to pay Paul. Well, Paul's going to come back and want that money at some point. I think if you guys have been seeing Board of Education meetings, they have some very large capital expenditures on the horizon. So we can potentially assist in tackling those without significantly changing the tax rate if this fund stays in this shape. If we take pennies from it, you short-term solve a problem that's going to turn around and rear its head right back up in a subsequent year. So some of the numbers I've been hearing tossed around, or some of the larger schools' roofing projects, most likely will require bonds. You may have some of the tax rate already needed in the appropriate fund. If we take it out, you're going to have to find it all. So, although it looks good, I would recommend leaving it alone. When the school presents, I think the date on that is still being set, but when the school presents, they can talk more to you about that. I would highly caution against doing a lot with education debt service payments. Any question on education debt service? All right, if not, I got one last one to go over. If you flip the tab, that's the General Capital Projects Fund. I have no notes on it, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. Again, there's nothing in here that you guys haven't approved. On page 1, if you look at line 40270, you'll see in the 23-24 column, that's where I'm showing the cap on solid waste, local option sales tax flowing over to general debt service, estimated at $170,000. Now that we have data, projected next year is at $150,000 for a conservative estimate. And if you'll turn over to page 2, you can see some of the various projects you guys have already approved. Some of them you approved last year, and they were completed, or for 23-24. They were approved in 23-24 and plan on being completed. Others do not, and so I've slid them over to 24-25. And it's not a new project. It is just sliding a project that did not get completed in one year over to the next. You'll see that for the licenses for the digital radios. You'll see that for the health department renovations that have not started. Trustees Commission has to be in there every year. If you look down at the bottom of page 2, that is the Food and Securities Grant. It's just passed through. Offsetting revenue was on the previous page. If you'll turn on to page 3, you'll see the fund balance estimated for 23-24 in our General Capital Projects Fund, as well as the estimate for our 24-25. So we do appear to still be growing this fund. The solid waste cap is a huge component of us growing this fund. So I think the question was asked to me, maybe by Mr. Gillum, how do we get ahead of some of these issues? Feeding this capital project fund is how we get ahead of some of these issues. This gives us a place to go for irregular expenditures, irregular one-time expenditures. So I'm very proud of this fund. Hope it continues to grow. Hope the Commission continues to fund it adequately so that it can allow us to issue less debt. We'll never be able to eliminate large-scale debt, but there's there's lots of items that we should be able to purchase with cash without having ever talk to a bond consultant. And this fund is how we do that. Any questions on general capital projects fund? All right, Jason, I tried to go as quick as I could to leave you some time. I went too quick.
Mine, will not be super long.
I'll send that to them.
Purchases.
Folks, I'm gonna have to reboot this computer. If you wanna take about a 5-minute break, grab some coffee, we'll go ahead and do that.
Let me know who all wants to stay for pizza. Who all wants to stay for pizza or raise your hand? 1, 2.